Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast, where leadership meets entertainment. I'm Kristin, and as always, I'm accompanied by my co-host and best-selling author, Ron Ward. Today, we are diving headfirst into a topic that's making headlines across the nation. Vice President Kamala Harris's bold proposal to tackle rising grocery prices by banning what she calls price gouging. It's a plan that's meant to protect American consumers, but as we'll explore today, it's a slippery slope towards something far more dangerous.
Kristin, that's right. And this is a leadership podcast, and we encourage our listeners to always do your research. And we talked last week about some of the things that I pulled up on Google that was very slanted. So sometimes you have to dig a little bit deeper to find the truth. But this is going to impact our country in a major way, this election. So I think that anyone listening to this podcast, you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your children, your grandchildren, to do some research and before you cast that vote, because it's very important. Now, on the surface, it sounds great. We're gonna put this lock on prices, and actually, we're going to show today that that's been done before. So we want to break it down, and let's look at the truth behind freezing prices or trying to prevent price gouging, which sounds great. And let's see where we end up, Kristin.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is complicated, as one can imagine. So economists and industry experts are raising alarm bells about the potential unintended consequences of such a policy. And grocery stores typically operate on razor-thin profit margins, usually between 1% and 3%. So when the government steps in and imposes price controls, it can distort the market, leading to shortages. And that's something that is very common anytime you hear about any communism. You're going to hear about shortages. And I have a story of one, I have Slavic friends here in the area. There's quite a few Slavic people in the Northwest. And I'm talking from Russia, Romania, and Ukraine. And I've been told so many stories about shortages and, even outside of shortages, higher prices in the long run. And we've seen this play out before, and not in a good way. The immediate comparison that comes to mind for me is Venezuela, a country that went from being one of the wealthiest in Latin America. A lot of people forget that. It was one of the wealthiest, and now it's one of the poorest. And that's largely because of similar economic policies. And, just to step into that here, Venezuela's descent into chaos began with price controls. Let me say that again. Venezuela's descent into chaos began with price controls that were intended to keep basic goods affordable for everybody. But instead of helping, these controls created massive shortages, hyperinflation, and a black market that exploited the very people the policies were supposed to protect.
That's right. And Kristin, there's something that a lot of people don't talk about when you're talking about price controls is, I want you to think about this. If there's a price control, there's no incentive for you to have a better product. There's no incentive for you to do better. There's no incentive for you to take care of your workers. So there is a trickle-down effect that is going to come about with price controls. And that's just a side note. And you're exactly right. When Hugo Chavez came to power in the early 90s, Venezuela was, as you said previously, it was considered a liberal democracy. And he came in slowly and gradually, and he had different ways. He promised all these things that he was going to rise people out of poverty. He was very popular, by the way. They were celebrating in the streets when he came to power. And then he began his economic plan, which eventually was pure socialism. And he began the price controls, and then the economy started to tank. Because here's the reason: he had everything attached to his energy. There was a lot of fossil fuels in Venezuela. So when the price would go up, he could boom and pay for all these social programs. But when the price of fuel would go down, then he was stuck. There was no alternative.
Right.
He had huge national debt. Does that sound familiar to anyone?
Oh, gosh.
We are up to an estimated $30 million or $1 trillion. And I can't believe, Kristin, that more people aren't talking about that. That should really be the whole platform.
Right.
Is regulations, the border, and paying down this national debt. So anyway, I digress.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's huge. And, it made me think of something. I know a lot of people have folks come to the door and they're like, do you want to save on your electricity bill or your power bills? And it's wild because there's a saying that I love, with the shekels come the shackles. And I have family members right now that are looking to sign up for some energy savings. You'll save up to $200 a month. And if your bill isn't that much, we'll pay you. And I'm like, folks, this is my close family here. I'm like, something's not right here, right? I did some research, and those people that sign up for this energy saving program, they can be susceptible to power out, like brownouts. I don't know if people are familiar with brownouts. Basically, you're not going to be able to use your electricity from midnight to 5 a.m, right? These controlled brownouts. So, we just have to think about everything. That something might sound good at face value, but you have to dig deeper. And as a leader, that's what you must do. You must dig deeper to find the truth. And that's what we are empowering you to do today. And the reason we're even bringing up Venezuela, there are so many parallels.
That's right.
And it's important. It's imperative that we talk about this. So Harris's proposal became really clear that these parallels existed, and that's why if even a Google search, even though Google is very slanted, I found quite a bit of research. People from CNN, all sorts of more left-leaning news outlets are even saying that there's some red flags here and some concern with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kristin, I told you offline that I'm reading a book called Killing the Witches. It's that killing series that Bill O'Reilly does. And it was so interesting to me to hear how all of the colonies were religious. And they had different types of religions. They didn't agree, the Puritans, the Quakers, the Catholics. But they began to see the desire for people to make their own decisions and have complete freedom from the crown. And they led this revolt. And that's really what led to the American Revolution. And if you look at the history of our government, this is the greatest country in the world. And when I see people protesting against America, I know they haven't traveled. I know they've not talked to the Slavic people and, people from way back in Germany and even in Cuba, when there's fruit dying on the vines that can't be sold. People don't understand what this type of thinking does, and it just kind of slithers in, and that's what we're seeing. Back to Venezuela, when Chavez came to power, again, it looked good, and the economy started to do better for just a brief period of time, and then he consolidated power, he dismantled any democratic institutions, and he suppressed, this is going to sound familiar, although there wasn't social media, he suppressed the news media. Anyone that spoke against him, he silenced them. There were people murdered. There was all these things. And this is what happens if you give too much power to one entity. That's why I love the Constitution so much, the balance of power between Congress, the Supreme Court, and the presidency or the executive branch. And outside of those parameters, if you were to break those parameters, there's never been a time when men and women consolidate that they can handle power and they can distribute things in a moral way. We have to understand that. If we don't have parameters, things are just going to collapse. That it always has, it always will. And I told someone humorously, but it's really true. Think about anything that the government took over. Look at our education system. We continue to decline worldwide because anytime you just have a big block of money, it doesn't get to the right place. The decision makers don't have the control. Things need to be localized. And again, Chavez got rid of all of that. There was no local people making decisions for the people in their communities. It was all done with a consolidated government, and it's always dangerous.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And that's really when the real problems began. The government's response to we talked about oil earlier, the declining oil revenues. Their response was to print money, to print more money, which again, we're doing a lot of that right now. We're
Yes, we
printing
are.
more money, right? So that's leading to hyperinflation. Now, I haven't heard hyperinflation thrown around yet for us, but I think we're very close, if not already there. And they also implemented, we're talking about Venezuela, strict price controls to try to keep basic goods affordable for the population. But instead of helping, like we've said earlier, these price controls led to massive shortages. And I just wanted to share my Slavic friends. The one story really resonated with me. She is from the Ukraine, and this is going to sound a little funny, but to this day, she's like, I will not wear or buy white underwear. And here's why. They had to stand in line, and whatever was up on the shelf, that's what they would buy. They might have needed bread, butter, milk, but there was underwear there, right? Like that was just how it was. You got what you could get your hands on. And she said it was the only underwear came in these big bundles, and they were just white old lady underwear. And she said to this day, like it was so oppressive that to this day she won't wear it. Here she's in her 40s, and that was when she was a young girl. But still, it's like little things like that we have no idea about. And so these massive shortages are guaranteed with due time, right? And businesses, back to Venezuela, businesses couldn't afford to sell products at these government mandated prices. It reminds me of how a lot of places like, the entire West Coast here, the minimum wage is outrageous. The price, it's just outrageous. I don't know what it is. Do you know what your minimum wage is in South Carolina?
I don't exactly, but it's usually a little better than, places out in the West, even Midwest for that matter.
Yeah, like it makes more sense, right? Like ours are like up towards, I think Washington State is 20 an hour. Oregon's at least 15. So I'll have to actually go check on that. But it's just outrageous minimum wages, and businesses can't afford to keep up with that. And in this case, they couldn't afford to sell products at these mandated prices, so they stopped producing them. I mean, people don't realize they will stop producing them if they can't afford to manufacture. So what's that? The result? Empty shelves, long lines, and a black market that thrived on scarcity.
It's very true. And there's another underlying issue that, you don't award hard work. You don't award creativity and entrepreneurship and all the things that made our country great. Again, when you try to level the playing field, I get it. You want people to rise up. It sounds great, but you are stifling the people who are going to be world changers, the people who could be great decision makers, because they're not going to have any incentive.
Right.
There's this suppressive attitude. And, Kristin, in my executive coaching, I find it very interesting, but it's become an art for people to figure out how to get free things from the government. And again, people can look at me and say, oh, you get a government pension and all these other things. My dad taught me early on, there was a time when the coal mining industry, and he had coal trucks, that it went under. And you want to talk about a life lesson. My dad had a garage that, by the way, it wasn't like he had a lot of money. He bought a building that had been torn down, and he moved it and built it, put it together. But when the coal industry went down, he wasn't hauling any coal. He got laid off. And instead of going to the employment line that we call unemployment line, he went over to the garage and started telling neighbors, I'm working on cars. And he refused to take unemployment benefits. Now, I'm not saying that applies to everyone, but I'm saying it taught me such a lesson. So when one of the first things that I get people to do is stop depending on someone else to rescue you. Yeah. Stop thinking that a rich uncle's going to die. Stop thinking the federal government's got one more giveaway that they're going to do, or one more social policy, and decide that you're going to make it either way, with or without the government. And if people can get to that point, I always see them prosper. But when you've got that beggar's mentality that I'm looking for a handout, it is very difficult to prosper and get ahead.
Yeah.
And it's counterintuitive and people don't even realize it.
And it
So
kills the human spirit.
that's exactly what it does. And capitalism, of course, people will always, when I discuss capitalism, socialism with someone who doesn't like capitalism, they usually have I'm sorry, but they have very little understanding of what it means or the
Right.
depth of it. But capitalism really does encourage you to be better, do better. And if you think about all the different things that's happening worldwide, everything from, we joke about participation trophies, and we try to make everyone feel good, and we try to give everyone an even playing field and give everyone benefits and all this other stuff. But at some point, people lose the spark. They lose the
Yeah.
drive to
Oh, yeah.
excel. But going back quickly, this part amazed me, Kristin, in this research, that even after Hugo Chavez has ruined Venezuela, just ruined,
Mm-hmm.
his replacement, Nicolas Maduro, doubled down on these policies. He took Chavez's policies and made them even worse.
Ugh.
And by 2018, the inflation rate in Venezuela hit an unimaginable 130%. It wiped out people's savings.
130,000%.
130,000, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's insane.
130,000, which, I couldn't even read it properly. But people couldn't get basic goods. It's the white underwear story that you told. They
Right.
had to take what they could get. The healthcare system collapsed. Crime was soaring. Of course, anytime people get desperate, it's called the squeeze or the strain principle. People get desperate. They're going to do crazy things to feed their
Yeah.
families or whatever. So it became a hellhole. Venezuela, this beautiful place,
Yeah.
is nothing but a hellhole. And it's very
Yeah.
sad.
It is sad. And I heard, speaking of anything to put food on the table, I had even heard stories about how some of their zoos, how their people were going in and killing and eating the zoo animals and the exotic birds. And like, that's how desperate they are, right?
That's exactly right.
So
And you
really
know what
sad.
comes next? When
Oh, gosh.
Maduro, when all of this starts going on, he invokes the military. And then he
Mm,
began to shut down any opposition. And of course, people are afraid to speak up. How are you going to speak up if you've got the
right.
military watching you and you could be put to death? So
Yeah.
it is definitely, it's all compounded, and it starts small, and it's just a snowball effect. And that's exactly what happened in Venezuela. We need to be careful, folks,
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
careful.
We really do. And the importance of history. I mean, I can't say it enough. I was actually at, most people know I homeschool, and I was at a homeschool store getting some supplies for this upcoming year. And I heard a mom speaking to the owner of the bookstore, and she was like, "This is our first year homeschooling." And she was asking, him all these questions. And of course, he was recommending some social studies or history books. And she was like, "Oh no, ugh, history is so boring. I'm not going to teach that. Do you think I have to?" And he was like, "It applies to pretty much everything." And she's like, "Well, I just hate it. And what a snooze." And I kept thinking, you're going to homeschool. Like what a negative for her daughter, right? Like to not teach history. It just made me so sad, because that is just teaching and challenging this thought process, this ability to challenge the status quo and to understand, like, history is so cyclical. And that really stood out to me by, it doesn't click for everybody, but it's hopefully people start realizing that what we're seeing has happened at some point, just in a different location or in a different shape, right? And I'm not saying Harris's proposal will lead to the exact extreme outcome as Venezuela, right? I believe, and I should have put this in here, they don't have a Second Amendment. That is a piece that really separates us from so many countries, is the Second Amendment. And it's definitely under attack, but that is something I believe that in the 90s, when they were thriving, when they started to see some changes, there were gun laws put in place, right? Restrictions. So anyhow, so it's just crucial to recognize that these types of government interventions have a track record of leading to unintended and often disastrous consequences. And the road to economic instability is often paved with good intentions. I mean, I even challenge like Karl Marx. He died before that Marxism even went into
Yeah.
effect. He died, and I often wonder, did he have good intentions? I have honestly wondered that. We don't know. He wasn't there for the outcome, right? And on paper, a lot of this looks decent, right? Makes sense. But this is why we need to have this conversation. I don't care if someone's right, left, in the middle, it doesn't matter. It's easy to get caught up with all of the rhetoric of protecting customers and fighting corporate greed, but we have to look at the bigger picture. And if we start down this path of price controls and heavy-handed government intervention, we very well may find ourselves dealing with the same kinds of problems that have plagued countries like Venezuela.
Yes. Kristen, a lot of people don't understand the American economy. I want you to think of it as a
Yeah.
racehorse, and it is powerful, this strong, majestic racehorse. And the only way to slow down this racehorse is you put barriers that it has to navigate. If you notice a racehorse, it runs straight down the track. It doesn't run a
Yeah.
serpentine because it's powerful. So what happens is in these situations, and again, we're not saying that this is a direct route to Venezuela, but we need to be aware. And we also need to be aware of what makes this racehorse, this economy, work. And to be honest with you, it amazes me when presidents take all this credit, because really all you have to do is decrease regulations. In other
Right.
words, you're removing obstacles for this racehorse, and you begin to use the resources that you have. You promote the one thing that you can ask my dad this one day, Kristen, if you ever
I'd love
talk.
to.
When I was probably 16 years old, we had encyclopedias. Do not make an age joke.
No, I had them
There
too.
was,
I thought we were rich because we had an encyclopedia set.
yeah, I started doing
Turns out we weren't.
research, and I began to realize that we were getting cheated on trade deals. And
Oh,
I told my dad, because we still had China on the recovering nation status. And I was like, I'm talking about, I was 16 or 17. I said, I think they've recovered enough. Why are we
wow.
giving our enemies money? Why aren't we,
Yeah.
everybody's taxing us. They're putting tariffs on our goods. Why aren't we? And I literally knew nothing about government, but I was smart enough to know that you can't make a
Incredible.
trade deal and keep trading with people when they're taxing you. You're not taxing them.
Yeah. Good
So
for you.
I had a conversation with someone that works for a major auto industry, and this is our problem, Kristen, in a nutshell. We think we want instant gratification. So we began to get in this conversation, and it was about China. It was about tariffs. And he said, that's gonna ruin us. It's gonna make prices go up. There's no doubt prices would probably go up in the short term in some
Right.
areas. But long term, it's going to make us prosper. We're going to be bringing in, all of this money. But the whole point is, I could not change this individual's mind because they wanted instant gratification. They didn't want to sacrifice it all
Right.
or wait on anything to happen. But as we're moving in to a close here, the price controls can always lead to something else. And by the way, we need evidence-based practices, and there's nothing that shows that price controls are going to win long term. But we also need to foster competition. Think about the racehorse again.
Yes.
We feed them right, we train them, and man, when that jockey gets on there, we're going for the win. And that used to be America's philosophy. But now
Right.
we have people who hate their country. We need to get back to loving our country. We need to get back to promoting these people who are smart. Let them run, and let them invent, let them create. And let's get
Yes.
back to where, we were strong, but instead we're trying to do the exact opposite.
Yeah, it's right. I mean, and as we move forward, it's critical that we stay informed and question these policies being proposed and consider the long-term implications. I mean, we owe it to ourselves at minimum. And you've mentioned future generations, to our kids, our grandkids, to make sure that we're not repeating the mistakes of the past.
That's for sure. And Kristin, I've been reading so much and listening to people, but we owe it to generations to come to get all of this mess straightened out as much as we can, especially this national debt that, our children's children is going to have to inherit and eventually pay off. We just can't keep doing business the way we have. So I hope that all of our listeners will be informed or make themselves informed. They will remove all the emotion and look at policies and think about what's going to be best for our country. You have to maintain, you have to be a superpower, or it's been proven over and over again, you're going to get taken over. It's just the truth.
Yeah.
It's peace through strength. So at some point, when the debt gets so high, inflation is so high, we're not going to be able to fund the military technology and have the personnel that we need. So all of these things, again, it's that cascading effect that I talked about, and it can happen to us. And it's time for us to take a stand. It's time to demand that Congress start paying the debt down, because both sides have been spending money, printing money. And the people are going to have to get back involved in government. And that's one of the reasons Kristin knows that we did this podcast, is to think that we did our little bitty part in getting people to wake up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, just start local, because it's overwhelming. Our brains were never designed to take on the problems of the world, or to even take on the problems of the country, right? So for folks like that just, it overwhelms them. I know my sister doesn't watch any news. She's deleted her social media apps because she can't really handle what's coming at her. I like to strike a balance. I like it. I like to know it all, right? But for those who get overwhelmed easily with that, focus on your local community, your school board, focus on the county council, the city council. Just get involved somehow locally and start there and see what you can do. Turn some of your frustration into action, just right in your own backyard.
So in closing, I want you to let us know. I think Kristin needs to run for office there in Portland.
My family won't let me.
And I need to head up one of the major federal law enforcement agencies. So you guys get it going, and
dynamic duo.
We'll make a difference. We'll take them on.
I know. And I forgot to mention this in the very beginning. So we have 69 countries that actively listen to us and have downloaded episodes, which is really cool. I mean, that's like incredible. You know what our number 2 country is? It's Germany. It doesn't go like United States, Canada. It goes United States, Germany.
Interesting.
And I've mentioned this before. If people take a look at what's happening in Germany, things are really bad and economically, right? And so I feel good about the fact that we're enlightening folks really across the globe. And where we see the First Amendment dying, at least we're still a voice of reason for so many.
If you're listening from Venezuela, hold on. Things ebbs and flows. One day you're going to come out on top.
Oh, yes. Hey,
Keep
you know
your
what?
faith.
You know what's wild? You talked about the auto industry. Venezuela I believe it was like 92 or 94. They were one of the top Ford F-150s and F-350s. They were distributed to Venezuela. They were one of the top purchasers of Ford trucks in the world.
Wow.
And those aren't cheap vehicles, right? So that says something about the economy. And so it's wild. And they can get back there, and we can avoid going in that direction. But to do that, we the people need to be awake.
That's right. All right, everybody, have a blessed end of your week, and be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.